Yours goes on this one, Coralie. I can't risk you bringing germs near my daughter from that hospital. This is my house, so you follow my rules. And stop playing the victim in front of my kid. Everyone is tired of it.
What, that beautiful kitchen you're so proud of? I paid for it with the money meant to keep your sick daughter alive, and I already took it all back. My daughter-in-law stood on my front porch and told me I had finally gone too far. So I looked her dead in the eye and I told her the truth. That gorgeous new kitchen she was so proud of, the one she decided I wasn't clean enough to eat in, the one with the quartz and the gold-rimmed china, it was built with the exact money that was supposed to keep her sick daughter alive. She went pale and whispered that I wouldn't dare. I told her, honey, I already have, and I watched every drop of color drain right out of her face. My name is Coralie Whitfield. I am 71 years old, a retired charge nurse, a widow, and this is the story of the night I stopped saying yes. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please stay with me until the end. The thing nobody tells you about being invisible is that you do it to yourself first. You practice, you get good at it. By the time somebody else decides you don't matter, you have already been rehearsing the part for years. It was a Thursday in October, and I had walked the 4 blocks to my son's house in a wind that cut right through my coat, because Ren had just come home from the hospital and I wanted to be there. My granddaughter is 13. She has cystic fibrosis, which is a fancy way her body treats her own lungs like an enemy. And I have spent 13 years learning every ugly detail of that disease so that I could stand between it and her. That week, she had been in for a tune-up, which is what they call it when they run the IV antibiotics and the chest therapy for 10 days straight to buy her a few more good months. She was home now, skinny, tired, but home. And Adrian had decided we would all have a nice family dinner to celebrate. I brought a green bean casserole because I cannot walk into a house empty-handed. My mother would rise up out of the ground. I set it on the counter and I saw the kitchen the way you see something you already know is going to hurt you. The new cabinets, the quartz island, the pendant lights, the set of white china with the thin gold rim that Adrian kept on open shelves like a magazine spread. It was a beautiful room. I had been telling myself for 2 years that it was a beautiful room and leaving it there. Garrett gave me a hug that lasted about a second and a half and then went back to the television in the next room, the way he does, with the volume just a notch too loud. My son is 44 years old, and he has spent his entire adult life turning up the sound so he doesn't have to hear what his own house sounds like. We sat down to eat. Roast chicken, potatoes, the casserole I brought, all of it laid out on that pretty gold-rimmed china. And in front of my chair, at the corner of the table nearest the wall, where I have to stand up every single time somebody needs to squeeze by, Adrian set down a plate that was not china. It was plastic, faded blue. There was a chip out of the rim and a hairline crack running through it like a little scar. She did it lightly. That is the part I want you to understand. She did it the way you'd hand a toddler a sippy cup. She smiled and she said, Coralie, I put your food on this one. I hope you don't mind. I just can't take any chances with germs right now. You spend all day in that hospital and Ren's immune system is shot. You get it. I spend all day in that hospital. I have been retired for 6 years. And more than that, I am the person who taught infection control to 2 decades of new nurses at that hospital. I know exactly how germs move and exactly how they don't. A plate that has been through a dishwasher does not carry a thing. What she was describing was not medicine. It was a costume she'd dressed an insult in, so that nobody at the table could call it what it was. And here is the moment the floor dropped out from under me. Quiet, no sound at all. Because as I looked down at that cracked blue plate, I realized I had seen it before. I had seen it a lot. Little dinners over the summer, a birthday back in the spring. That plate, or its plastic cousin, kept showing up in front of me, and every single time I had told myself some story. It's the good dishes. She doesn't want them chipped. There weren't enough clean ones. I'm being oversensitive. She's exhausted. The baby's sick. I had been handed the same message over and over for the better part of a year, and I had swallowed it every time because the alternative meant admitting the truth. She had a system. There was the family who ate off the gold rim, and there was me who ate off the plastic. And tonight, using my own granddaughter's illness as the excuse, she had finally said it out loud in front of God and everybody. I looked at Garrett. He was cutting his chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, staring at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. And he did not say one word, not one. My son heard his wife hand his mother a cracked plastic plate and blame it on his daughter's dying lungs. And he cut his chicken, and I looked at Wren. She was 13, and she was sitting there with her fork frozen halfway to her mouth, and she had heard the whole thing. She looked at that plastic plate, and she looked at me, and I watched something break in her little face, and she did not say anything either. Because what is a 13-year-old supposed to say in a room full of adults who have already made up their minds? She just quietly pushed her chair back and said she was tired and needed to go lie down, and she went upstairs, and nobody stopped her. Nobody said, "Wren, stay, this is your party." They just let her go. That was the part that did it. Not the plate. The plate was just plastic. It was watching my granddaughter learn, right there at the dinner table, that this is how you treat a grandmother. That love comes with a rule about which dishes you're allowed to touch. That silence is what you do when somebody you love gets treated like she's dirty. So I made a decision, and I made it in about the space of one breath. I decided I was not going to give Adrian the scene she was half hoping for. I was not going to cry, or push back my chair, or say something my mother would have called hysterical, so that later she could tell her sister that Coralie just lost it over a plate. Can you believe how dramatic she is? Hostile, difficult, dramatic. I have heard all three of those words used about me, always secondhand, always from a relative who heard it from her. I was not going to hand her a fourth one. I ate off the plastic plate. I ate every bite. The chicken, the potatoes, my own casserole. I complimented the food. I asked about the drive to the specialist. I acted, and I mean I gave a performance like a woman who had not just been shown exactly ranked in her own son's house. And when we were done, I got up and I carried my cracked blue plate to the sink and I washed it myself because I did not want anyone touching my germs. And I dried it and I put it away. And here's the thing I noticed while I was doing it. There was a drawer down low off to the side, and inside it was the plastic. A couple of cups, some old bowls, that plate, a little set of dishes that lived apart from the real ones, my set. She had given me a drawer. Somewhere along the way, my daughter-in-law had assigned me my own private drawer of poor people's dishes in the kitchen I helped pay for, and I had never once let myself see it. I put the plate in the drawer. I closed it. I said my goodnights. Garrett said, "Drive safe, Mom," and I reminded him I had walked. And he said, "Oh, right, take care," and turned back to the TV. Adrian said, "Thanks for coming, Coralie," in that bright voice she uses when she has already won something. And I walked out the front door into the cold. I want to tell you I fell apart on that sidewalk. I didn't. That is not what happened. What happened is I got very, very calm, the kind of calm I used to get on the worst nights in the ER, when a body came in that everybody knew wasn't going to make it, and the only useful thing left in the room was a nurse who did not panic. That calm. My hands were steady. My knees hurt, because they always hurt now, and the leaves were wet under my shoes, and I kept my head down, and I did the only thing I could think to do with all of it. I counted, not dollars, not that night. That came later. That night, I counted years. I counted the rehearsal dinner where her mother called me Coralie for 4 straight hours, and nobody corrected her to say, "That's Garrett's mom." I counted the Thanksgiving where I got seated in the corner by the wall. I counted the quilt I hand-stitched for Wren out of Garrett's baby clothes that spent 7 years in a closet. I counted every time I had folded my hands in my lap and called the folding love. And by the time I got to my own dark porch, 4 blocks and about 100 small surrenders later, I had a number, 15. 15 years of making myself smaller so that I would be allowed to stay in the room. I let myself in and I did not turn on the lights, and I sat down at the oak tables. I Everett refinished the last summer he was still strong enough to hold a sander, and I sat there in the dark for a long time. I was not sad. I want to be clear about that because people expect the sad part and there wasn't one. I was clear. For the first time in 15 years, I was completely, coldly clear. And somewhere in that dark kitchen, in that quiet, a thought arrived that I had never once let myself think in all those years of saying yes. They think I have nothing they need. They have no idea what I've been carrying. I did not sleep much that night, and the not sleeping was not the tossing kind. It was the kind where your mind is a clean, well-lit room, and it is showing you things one at a time and asking you to look. In the morning, I made coffee in the little one-cup pot, the one I bought after Everett died because the big pot made too much, and pouring the extra down the sink every morning felt like a small funeral I could not keep attending. I sat at the oak table with my hands around the mug, and I did not eat because I was not hungry, and I let myself remember on purpose for the first time in a decade. Here is what I had trained myself to forget. I remembered the wedding back in 2011. I remembered Adrian's mother, a woman with a laugh like a car alarm, calling me Cora Lee all night, and I remembered thinking, well, that's fine, we just met. But I also remembered the toast, when the maid of honor said something about how Adrian was finally getting the family she deserved, and everybody clinked their glasses, and I sat there in my good blue dress and felt like a guest at something that used to belong to me. I remembered the first Christmas after Wren was diagnosed. She was a baby, and they were drowning. The way you drown when your infant has a disease with a name most people can't spell. And I did what I have always done, which is I showed up. I drove them to appointments. I learned the vest, the nebulizer, the enzymes she has to take with every bite of food her body. Can't pull the nutrition out of it. I sat in the pediatric wing at 2 a.m. so Garrett and Adrian could sleep. Because a body needs sleep, and a nurse knows how to run on none. And I remembered that at some point in there, without any conversation about it, the story became that Adrian was the strong one, the warrior mom, the fighter, and I was just Coralie, who helped out sometimes. I let that story stand. I even told it about myself. She is such a strong mother, I would say, as if I had not been in that hospital room every single night. I remembered 100 little things, and I am not going to lay all 100 out for you, because you have your own 100, don't you? Everybody who has ever made themselves small for someone else has 100. But I want to tell you the one that finally turned the key, because it is the one that leads to why I did what I did. Somewhere around the time Ren turned 3, the specialist started talking about a new class of drug. A modulator, they call it, which is just a fancy word for a medicine that goes after the actual broken machinery inside her instead of mopping up after it. For a kid with the right mutation, it is not a cure, but it is close to a miracle. Ren qualified. And the number attached to that miracle, before insurance, was the kind of number that does not sound real when a doctor says it out loud in a beige room. Even after insurance, even after the copay assistance and the manufacturer program, and every form I filled out with my nurse's handwriting, there was a gap. Every month there was a gap. Specialist visits out of network because the in-network one had a 9-month wait, the enzymes, the supplements, the parts of keeping a child with cystic fibrosis alive that the paperwork calls not medically necessary, which is a phrase invented by people who have never watched a kid struggle to breathe. And every month, for years, quietly, without one word of thanks, because I never asked, I closed that gap. It came out of my retirement. Everett left me comfortable, not rich, comfortable, and I had my pension, and I made a decision, the same way I make all my decisions, without announcing it, that a chunk of what he and I had saved for our old age was going to go to keeping our granddaughter breathing. I set it up so a transfer went out every month. Garrett and Adrian knew I helped. I think in their minds I helped the way a grandmother chips in for school shoes. I do not think either one of them ever sat down and did the math on what I was actually carrying, because if they had, Adrian could not have handed me that plastic plate. You do not put the woman funding your child's survival at the corner table by the wall unless you have simply never let yourself see her. That was the thought that stopped me, right there at the oak table with the coffee going cold. They did not see me because I had made myself so easy not to see. I had done that, 15 years of it, so I decided to stop. But before I decided what to do, I needed to know exactly where things stood, because I am a nurse and you do not treat what you have not assessed. And this is where the morning turned into something I did not expect. 2 years back, around the time the kitchen got redone, I had done something I thought of as the smartest thing I ever did. I had taken a large sum, a real sum, and I had given it to Garrett to open a dedicated account for Ren's care. A treatment fund. The idea was simple. Instead of me patching the gap month to month out of my dwindling savings, we would put a serious cushion in one place in Ren's name so that if anything ever happened to me, the money to keep her going was already sitting there. Safe, earmarked, untouchable. $87,000. I remember the number because I remember signing the check at that same oak table and thinking, this is the most useful thing this money will ever do. I gave it to Garrett because he was her father and because you are supposed to be able to trust your son. I told him, set it up clean, keep it separate. This is Ren's. This is not for the mortgage or a rainy day or anything else. This is the account that keeps her alive if I'm gone. And he looked me in the eye and he said, of course, Mom, I'll take care of it. And I never checked. Do you hear me? In 2 years, I never once asked to see a statement because asking felt like calling my own son a liar, and I did not want to be the kind of mother who does that. So that morning, before I did anything else, I called him. Not angry, just a nurse gathering her chart, I said, Garrett, I want to get the treatment fund folded into some paperwork I'm setting up. Can you send me the account information? And there was a pause on the line. Just a beat too long. A beat I have heard 1,000 times from family members standing in a hallway when I come out to tell them the news. And he said, Mom, which fund? And I said, Ren's fund, honey, the 87. And he said, can I call you back? He did not call me back. I sat with that pause for about an hour, and then I did the thing I should have done 2 years earlier. I called the bank. And because I was still listed as a signer on the original account, a fact Garrett had apparently forgotten, a very polite young man named Devin walked me through the history while I held the phone with a hand that had gone strangely steady. There was no treatment fund. There had been for about 6 weeks. The 87,000 had gone in right where it was supposed to, and then over the following 2 months it had gone out. Not to a hospital, not to a pharmacy, to a contractor, to a cabinet company, to a countertop fabricator, to an appliance store. One charge, a little over $4,000, and I did not have to guess what that one was, because I had eaten dinner off the plates that came out of that gold-rimmed cabinet the night before. The money I set aside to keep my granddaughter alive built the kitchen I was not clean enough to eat in. I want to tell you I threw the phone. I want to tell you I screamed, because Lord knows I have earned a scream. But that is not what happens to me. What happens to me is the room goes clean and well lit and quiet, the ER calm, and I thanked Devin, and I hung up, and I sat there, and I did not move for a long time. Because there are 2 kinds of betrayal, and I had just found the second worse one. The plate was Adrian. The plate was a cruelty, and it was hers, and it was ugly, but I could almost understand a stressed out, frightened mother being cruel. The kitchen was different. The kitchen was Garrett. The kitchen meant my son had looked me in the eye at this very table, taken the money meant to keep his own daughter breathing, spent it on quartz, and then said, of course, Mom, I'll take care of it, and gone home and eaten off it every night for 2 years while I patched the gap out of my pension and got seated by the wall. The plate was an insult. The kitchen was a theft, and the theft had a smile and my son's face on it. I got up. My knees screamed at me, and I told them to hush. I went to the drawer beside the telephone, the one Everett always called the important drawer, and I took out a folder I had not opened in a long time, and I found the card of a woman named Odette Brannigan. She had handled Everett's estate. We traded Christmas cards. She was not a friend exactly, but she was the sharpest person I knew who had ever sat across a table from me, and I needed sharp. But before I called her, I called Thea. Thea Ballard and I did 31 years on the same floor. She has seen me hold a grown man's hand while he died and then walk straight into the next room and start an IV without her hands shaking. She is the only person alive who knows exactly what I am made of. She picked up on the second ring and said, well, look who remembered my number. And I said, Thea, I need you to just listen for a minute. And she got quiet because she knows my voice, and I told her the whole thing. The plate, the drawer of plastic dishes, the 87,000, the kitchen. She was silent for a moment when I finished. Then she said one thing, and it was the thing I needed, the thing only somebody who has known you for 30 years can say. She said, Coralie, you have spent your whole life being the one who doesn't fall apart so everybody else gets to. Honey, when is it your turn? And I said, Thea, I think it's my turn right now. I think it's finally my turn. She gave me the name of a lawyer, a good one, but I told her I already had Odette, and she laughed, a little dark laugh, and she said, oh, they have no idea what's coming, do they? And I said, no. No, they do not. Then I hung up the phone and I picked it back up and I dialed Odette Brannigan. And when her assistant asked what it was regarding, I heard myself say, in the calmest voice you ever heard, I need to change my will, I need to protect my granddaughter, and I need to sell my house. Odette Brannigan's office smelled like paper and cold coffee and the particular dust that settles on law books nobody has opened since the 80s. She had reading glasses on a beaded chain and a way of letting a silence sit in the room until it told her something. I like that about her. In my line of work, the people who talk the most are usually the ones who know the least. I wore my navy skirt and the blouse with the little pearl buttons, the one Everett bought me for our 40th. You dress for what you are about to do, my mother used to say. And I was about to do something I should have done a long time ago, so I dressed for it. I set 3 things on her desk, one at a time, the way you lay out instruments before a procedure. My bank statements, the ones Devin had helped me pull, with the 87,000 going in and the countertops going out, the deed to my house, and the envelope with my will in it, the one Everett and I had drawn up together, the one that still named my son as if my son were a person I could trust. Odette looked at the statements for a long time. She is not a woman who reacts. But I watched her jaw work once, just once, and she took her glasses off, and she said, Coralie, walk me through what you want to do, not what you're feeling, what you want to do. And that was exactly the right question, because I had spent 15 years being asked what I was feeling, and then having my feelings explained back to me as an overreaction. Nobody had asked me in a long time what I wanted to do. So I told her. The first thing I said is Ren. Whatever else happens, that child does not lose one day of treatment over what her parents are. I want a trust, an irrevocable one. I want the money that keeps her breathing to go straight from the trust to the hospital and the pharmacy. And I want it managed by a professional, not by her father, not by her mother, not by me if I'm gone. I want it built so that no adult in that house can touch a dollar of it, can borrow against it, can spend it on a kitchen. I want it locked, and I want Ren to be the only door. Odette wrote that down. Then she said, that's going to take a real number to fund properly, given her life expectancy and the cost of the therapy. Do you have that number? I do not, I said, but I know where it is. The second thing I said is that every other dollar I have ever quietly sent into that house stops today. The monthly help, the gap I've been covering, all of it. Not because I want them to suffer. I want you to write that down too. I am not doing this to make anybody suffer. I am doing it because I have been holding up a roof that the people underneath it think holds itself up. And I want them to feel the actual weight of their own house for once in their lives. Odette almost smiled. She wrote it down. The third thing is my will, I said. Take Garrett off of it. Off as executor, off as beneficiary, off the checking account, off the annuity Everett left in my name. I want a professional fiduciary named instead. And I slid the old will across the desk like it was something I had found gone bad in the back of the refrigerator. She read it. She looked up. She said, Coralie, you understand what you're telling me. You're not adjusting shares. You're removing your only child. I have one child, I said, and I have one grandchild. And I have spent my whole life confusing the two of them for the same loyalty. Garrett is a grown man of 44 who took the money meant to keep his sick daughter alive and bought himself nicer countertops, and then watched his wife hand me a cracked plate and blamed it on the child whose money paid for the room. I am not removing a boy. I'm removing a decision that boy made over and over for 2 years with his eyes open. There's a difference. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, and the funding for Ren's trust. Where does it come from? And this is where I put my hand flat on the deed. I'm selling the house, I said. She sat back. Coralie, that home's been in your name since before Garrett was born. I know, I said. That's exactly why it's mine to move. Now, I want to be honest with you the way I was honest with Odette, because I do not want any of you thinking a 71-year-old woman went and threw her whole life savings into the wind out of spite. Because that is not what happened, and if it had been, I deserve every hard thing people say about the old woman who lost it. I did the math. I did it the way I do everything, cold and on paper. I am 71. I have my pension and my Social Security and the annuity, and those cover me. Those keep me housed and fed and doctored for the rest of my life, whether the market goes up or down. What I did not have anymore, after 2 years of patching gaps and one stolen fund, was a large lump of savings to leave behind. The house was that lump. The house was $400,000 of equity, sitting there doing nothing but reminding me of a man who wasn't in it anymore. So the whole cold plan was this: sell the house, take enough to buy myself something small and paid off, a one-bedroom I could close the door on, no mortgage, no risk. Keep a healthy cushion for my own old age, my own medical costs, because I, of all people, know what those become, and take the bulk of what was left, well over 200,000, and pour it into Wren's trust where it would sit and grow and pay for her care long after I was gone and long after her father had blown through anything else he could get his hands on. It was not spite. It was the most useful thing that money would ever do, which is the same thing I had said 2 years earlier about the 87,000, except this time nobody was going to be able to turn it into a kitchen. Odette listened to all of it, and when I finished, she took her glasses off again, and she looked at me for a long moment, not like a lawyer, just like a woman looking at another woman. And she said, "You've thought about this more than most people think about anything." I said, "I've had 15 years to think about it. I just hadn't filed the paperwork. We worked for the better part of 3 afternoons, not one, because so Odette said doing it right and doing it fast are two different animals, and she was not going to hand Adrian a single loose thread to pull on later. The trust took the longest. She brought in a colleague who did nothing but special needs planning, a careful man named Roy, who asked me questions about Wren's diagnosis that told me he actually knew what cystic fibrosis costs a family over a lifetime. And by the end of it, we had built something I would put up against anybody. Locked, funded, managed by a fiduciary with a fancy title and a legal duty to Wren and to nobody else. Her parents could rage at it all they wanted. They could not open it. The will got revised. Garrett came off, clean. The fiduciary went on, and Odette added something I had not thought of, a short letter of intent in my own words that would be read alongside the will, so that no one could ever stand in a courtroom and claim their poor confused mother had been talked into this by somebody. I wrote it in my nurse's handwriting. I said, "I am of completely sound mind. I have never been clearer about anything, and I have made these choices myself on purpose, with full understanding of what they mean." I signed it. Odette witnessed it. Roy witnessed it. My hand did not shake. And then there was the last piece, the one that turned all the paper into something with teeth. Because you can rewrite a will in a drawer, and nobody ever has to know until you're gone. But I did not want Garrett and Adrian to find out at my funeral. I wanted them to find out now, while I was alive to mean it, while there was still time for it to be a door, and not just an ending. So Odette drafted a letter. It was not a nasty letter. I want you to understand that. There was no name calling in it. No, you did this and you did that. It was worse than that in a way, because it was calm. It was a formal notice on letterhead that as of its date, the following would be true: that all direct financial support previously provided by Coralie Whitfield to Garrett and Adrian Whitfield was permanently discontinued. That all future medical care for Wren Whitfield would be administered through an irrevocable trust managed by a named fiduciary, to which the parents had no access and over which they held no authority. That the undersigned had revised her estate plan in full, and that any communication regarding these matters should be directed to the office of Odette Brannigan, attorney at law. That was it. No feelings. Just facts lined up in a row, cold and fair. The kind of letter that tells a person the ground they have been standing on for years was never theirs. Odette read it back to me one last time. Then she looked up and she said, "Certified mail, return receipt. So there's a record they got it." "Certified," I said. She asked me one more time, gently the way you're supposed to ask before something that can't be undone, Coralie. "Are you sure?" And I thought about the plastic plate in its little drawer. I thought about my granddaughter's fork frozen halfway to her mouth. I thought about my son cutting his chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. I thought about $87,000 mittens turned into a countertop I wasn't clean enough to touch. "I've been sure for about 72 hours, I said. "But I've been getting ready for 15 years. She nodded once. She put the letter in the envelope. And 2 days later, I stood in line at the post office, behind a man mailing a package to a soldier, and a girl mailing what looked like a wedding invitation, ordinary people mailing ordinary lives. And when it was my turn, I slid the envelope across the counter and I said, 'Certified, please. Return receipt.' And the clerk stamped it and dropped it in the bin, without any idea that he had just closed a door that had been open for 15 years. I walked home in the October cold. My knees hurt, the leaves were wet, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not count a single thing. The letter takes 3 days to travel 4 blocks, which is one of those facts about the world that would be funny if it were happening to somebody else. I mailed it on a Wednesday. I know it landed on a Saturday because Saturday evening my phone lit up with my son's name at 42, and I sat at my oak table and I watched it ring and I let it go. I want to tell you about the calls, because the calls are where you learn who somebody actually is. Not in the good moments. Anybody can be decent when the sun is out. You learn a person by what comes out of them the second the ground moves. The first voicemail was Garrett, and it was confused, or doing a good impression of confused. "Mom," it said, "Mom, we got some kind of letter from a lawyer. I don't. What is this? Is this real? Call me back." He did not sound sorry. I want to be precise about this because I listened to it more than once, the way you read a chart twice to make sure. He did not sound like a man who had done something wrong. He sounded like a man whose ATM had stopped working. I deleted it. At 7:15, he called again, and this time Adrian was in the room. I could hear her behind him, that voice she has, pitched high and tight, and I could hear him trying to keep his own voice low and reasonable, which is the exact thing he does. The man who turns the volume up so he doesn't have to hear the fight, now trying to turn his own wife down. "Mom," he said, "listen, Adrian's really upset. She thinks you're doing this to punish her, and I told her that's not who you are. So can you just call me so we can figure this out like a family?" Delete, like a family. I played that one twice, just that phrase, just to hear him say it. Like a family. As if the word were a coupon he could still redeem. As if family had been the thing operating in that kitchen when his wife handed me the plastic plate and he cut his chicken. Sunday, the calls came in a little army. 8 in the morning, 9:30, noon. And I noticed something in them, a change, the way you notice a fever climbing. In the early ones, he was still performing the confusion, still asking, what is this? Is this a mistake? Did the lawyer make an error? But by the afternoon, the performance was wearing thin, and underneath it, I could hear the real thing starting to come up, which was not guilt, it was fear. He was doing the math for the first time in 2 years. He was sitting in that gold-rimmed kitchen, realizing that the woman he had written off as a helpful old lady had been the floor under his entire life, and the floor had just been pulled up, and he was looking down and there was nothing there. Then at 1:40, Adrian called for the first time. And this one I want to read you almost word for word, because it is a masterpiece of a certain kind. "Coralie, it's Adrian. I honestly don't know what I did to make you this angry, but I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I think we should talk about it like adults. Garrett is beside himself. I am beside myself. Ren is asking questions, and we don't know what to tell her. Please, please call me back." I listened to it twice, and I did what a nurse does, which is triage. I noticed the order. Garrett is beside himself first. I am beside myself second. Ren, the actual child, third, and even then only as a problem. Ren is asking questions, and we don't know what to tell her, as though the trouble were the questions and not the reason for them. And I noticed the thing that was not there, the thing that has never once been there in 15 years, in any voicemail, a porch conversation, in any holiday. Nowhere in it, not one time, was the word sorry. I don't know what I did, not I'm sorry for what I did. A misunderstanding. As if the plate had misunderstood itself onto the table. I deleted it. Monday, Garrett again, and the voice was flatter now, the fear settling into something heavier. This is the voice of a man who has started to understand that his mother is not going to come save him from his own choices, and does not know what to do with a mother who has stopped. I did not answer, and then Tuesday afternoon the doorbell rang. I went to the window first the way I do now, and there he was on my porch. No jacket, just the flannel he wears around the house, his hair like he'd been dragging his hands through it, and behind him in the driveway, in the passenger seat of the SUV, Adrian, arms crossed, face turned away, not even willing to walk up the steps. Sending him in, of course. I did not open the door. Mom, he said, and I could hear him through the wood. Mom, I know you're home. Your kitchen light's on. Mom, please. Whatever Adrian said, whatever happened, we can fix it. Just open the door. Whatever Adrian said, whatever happened, like weather, like something that blew in. And I stood on my side of that door with my hand flat against it, not to steady myself, just to feel it, this good solid door that was mine, and I did not make a sound. He stayed out there almost 10 minutes. He knocked a few more times, and then he did something I hadn't heard him do since he was 15 years old and had wrecked Everett's truck and had to come tell us. He made a sound, a small broken one, right there against my front door, the sound of a person who has just run into the edge of himself and found it harder than he expected. Then he went back to the SUV, and before the door even shut, I heard it start, her voice going up, his going quieter, the two of them driving away arguing about a mother who would not open a door. Now, here is where I need to tell you the thing I found out. Because up until this point in the story, I had let myself believe something that was easier than the truth. I had been telling myself that Garrett was weak, that he was a coward, that his whole sin was the sin of the man who turns up the television, the sin of doing nothing, of letting his wife run the show, because standing up to her was harder than sitting there. And there is a version of this story where that's all it is. And in that version, you can almost feel sorry for him, the poor spineless man caught between his mother and his wife. That is not the version I got. It came out sideways, the way the worst things do. Thea called me that week, and Thea's daughter-in-law is friendly with a woman who does the books part-time for the contractor, small town. Everybody's kitchen touches everybody else's. And Thea said, honey, I don't know if I should tell you this. And I said, Thea, at this point, just tell me. And she told me that when they did that kitchen, 2 years back, the contractor's office had a little trouble because the check bounced the first time. The timing was off, and the husband, Garrett, had come in personally to smooth it over. And in the course of smoothing it over, he had said, and the bookkeeper remembered it because it struck her as a strange thing to say. He had said not to worry, the money was coming. It was earmarked for something else, but he'd move it. His mother wouldn't miss it. She never checks. She never checks. He knew. That is the thing I sat with for a long time after Thea hung up. He did not stumble into it. He did not get overwhelmed and dip into the wrong account by accident and mean to pay it back. He looked at $87,000 that his own mother had handed him to keep his own daughter breathing, and he made a plan around the specific fact that I trusted him too much to look. She never checks. My trust was not something he failed to live up to. My trust was the tool he used. He weaponized the exact thing that made me a good mother to him. The not checking, the giving without counting, the assumption that, of course, my son would never. And he used it to build a countertop. That was the day the last soft thing in me about Garrett went quiet, not angry. I keep telling you I don't get angry the way people expect, and I didn't. It just went quiet. The way a monitor goes quiet, the way a room goes still when there's nothing left to do for the patient, and everybody finally stops moving. The plate was Adrian being cruel. The kitchen I could have called a weak man's mistake, but she never checks was a decision. Made cold, made early, made with my love as the raw material. My son did not fall. My son aimed. So I did the last practical thing on this, and I want you to know I did it dry-eyed. I called a locksmith. He came the next morning, a young fellow named Julian with a Union patch on his jacket and a kind, tired face, and he changed every lock on my house. Front, back, side, garage. When he got to the back door, he whistled and said, "Ma'am, this old deadbolt's basically decorative. Who are you keeping out?" And I said, "My family." And he looked at me for a second, and then he nodded, slow, like a man who had his own version of that sentence at home, and he put in the strongest lock he had and didn't charge me for the second cylinder. I made 4 copies of the new key, one for my purse, one for the fireproof box, one for my neighbor Winnie Alcott, who has fed my cat every time I've left town since 1997 and has never once asked me for anything, and one for Odette, because she'd told me to leave a key with somebody who wasn't family, and I stood there in my newly locked house holding that 4th key, and I realized with a small, strange laugh that I did not have anybody else to give it to. So Odette got it. My lawyer has a key to my house. That tells you something about how the family accounting had come out. That night, I sat on my back step in Everett's old sweater, the one that still, if I don't think about it too hard, smells a little like him. 2 streets over a dog was barking at nothing. Somewhere a garage door rolled down, that long mechanical groan, and I thought about the drawer of plastic dishes and about a man who said she never checks, and I pulled the sweater tighter. And I did not go back inside for a long time. I was not sad. I want to say that one more time for the last time. Because after this, the story stops being about what they did and starts being about what I built. I was not sad. I was free. I had just changed the locks on 15 years, and every single new key was in a hand that had earned it. She came on a Saturday, alone, which told me right away that Garrett had run out of road. When a man like my son sends his wife to do the talking, it means he has already tried everything he knows, and none of it worked. And now he is hiding in the car of his own life while somebody braver goes to the door. Except Adrian is not brave. Adrian is something else. And I have thought a lot about the right word for it, and the closest I can get is certain. She had spent 15 years being absolutely certain of who I was, and she was about to find out she'd had the wrong chart the whole time. I saw her from the window. Good coat, the camel one she saves for church and for occasions where she needs to look like the reasonable party. And she was carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil, holding it out in front of her like an offering, like a covered dish, has ever once in the history of the world fixed a thing it was brought to fix. She rang the bell, she waited, she rang it again, and then a third time, longer, the ring of a woman not used to being made to stand on a porch. I opened the door, not wide, just enough to stand in the gap of it, one hand on the edge, my body filling the space so there was no version of this where she came inside. My house, my door, my rules about who eats in my kitchen, and she was not going to. "Coralie," she said, and she did the voice. The careful, reasonable one, the one that is already building the story she'll tell later, about how she came in peace and I was impossible. "Can we talk? We can talk right here," I said. She glanced past me at the porch chairs. I did not invite her to sit. That is a small cruelty, and I will own it. I let her stand there holding her foil dish, because for 15 years I had been the one standing, in the corner, by the wall, and she could hold a casserole for 5 minutes and find out how it felt. "This has gotten so out of hand," she started. The letter, the lawyer, the trust, then, and I could hear her reaching for the right frame, the version where none of this had a cause. I never meant for it to go like this. That night, the plate, Coralie, I was exhausted. Ren had been in the hospital all week. I hadn't slept. I said something the wrong way and it came out cold. I know how it sounded. It sounded exactly like what it was, I said. She flinched. People do when you decline to help them rewrite the moment. It sounded like a woman putting her husband's mother at the children's table, on the plastic, in front of a 13-year-old, and using that child's illness to do it. There was no wrong way for that to come out, Adrian. It came out the only way it could, because it was the truth of how you see me, and you only slipped because you were tired. Being tired doesn't put words in your mouth. It just takes the guard off the ones that were already there. Her jaw got tight. That blotchy red started coming up her neck, the color of a woman who is not used to being described accurately to her face. We can't pay for Wren's care without your help, she said, and there it was. Finally, the actual thing dropped between us on the porch. We can't afford it, Coralie. The trust, we can't touch it. We don't even know what's in it. And you've cut off everything else. So what exactly are we supposed to do? And I looked at her for a long moment, and I said, Adrian, do you hear yourself? That is the first question you have asked me about Wren's care in 15 years. Not once in all that time did you ever ask me how it was covered, or what it cost, or whether I could keep doing it. You just let it get done. And now that it's done in a way you can't control, your first question isn't how do we make this right? It's what are we supposed to do? Even now, even standing here, the verb is still about you. Her hand tightened on the dish. You're being cruel, she said. And I almost smiled, because I have been called cruel by experts secondhand for years, and here it was at last to my face. I'm being clear, I said. I know they feel like the same thing to you. They are not. And then I said the thing I had come to the door to say, the thing that was the whole reason I let her stand there instead of leaving her to ring an empty bell. Adrian, I said, I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear all of it before you say a word. That kitchen you're so proud of, the quartz. The gold-rimmed plates you served me on the night you decided I wasn't clean enough to touch them. 2 years ago, I gave Garrett $87,000. It was not a gift. It was Wren's. It was a treatment fund set up so that if anything ever happened to me, the money to keep your daughter alive would already be sitting there, safe in her name. I gave it to your husband because I trusted him, and he told me it was done, and it was done. He built you a kitchen with it. Every countertop, every cabinet, that appliance you love. You have been eating dinner for 2 years off the exact plates I got handed to on the night you sent me to the corner, and the plates were bought with your sick daughter's medicine. You wouldn't, she whispered. You wouldn't tell her that. I already have, I said. She's 13, Adrian, not stupid, and she deserves the truth more than you deserve to be protected from it. I watched it land. I have watched a lot of things land on a lot of faces in 40 years. I have told mothers their children were gone. I know exactly what the face does when the real thing arrives. And this was that. This was the mask coming off. And I want to be honest with you about what was under it, because I expected shame, and I did not get shame. What came up under Adrian's face for one long unguarded second was not sorrow. It was fury, pure and bright and personal. Not fury at what Garrett had done, not fury at herself. Fury at me for knowing, for saying it out loud, for refusing after 15 years to keep playing the part she had written for me, the harmless old woman who absorbs and never once tells the truth back. You have no idea, she said, and her voice had dropped all the way down, no careful, reasonable pitch left in it. You have no idea what it is like. And then it came out. The thing I did not know, the thing that turned her, for just a moment, from a villain into a person, which is the harder thing to look at. My mother died broke, she said. She was shaking now. She had lupus. She was sick for 9 years. And the bills ate everything. They took the house. By the end, she was dying in a rented room. And my father was already gone, and I was 23, and I watched the medical system take a human being apart for money and leave nothing. Nothing, Coralie. So don't you dare stand there and tell me I don't care about money when it comes to my daughter. I know exactly what a disease does to a family. I have watched it. I swore that would never be us, that I would never be that helpless, that I would hold on to every single thing I could get my hands on, so that when it came for Wren, we would not end up in a rented room. And yes, I am hard about it. I am hard about all of it, because being soft is what killed my mother. And there it was. I stood in my doorway and I looked at this woman I had spent 15 years quietly hating. And for one terrible, honest moment, I understood her all the way down. The certainty, the control, the grabbing, the kitchen, even, God help me, a kind of monument to never being poor and scared again. She had watched a disease eat her mother alive, and she had decided at 23 that she would armor herself with money and control and a nice house and a family that was hers, tightly hers. Ours, not yours, and she would never, ever be the helpless girl in the rented room again. And a sick child had walked right into the center of that terror, and it had made her not softer but harder, and the hardness had landed, of all the places it could have landed, on me. I understood her. And here is what I need you to understand, because this is the whole thing. This is the part I want you to take with you. Understanding her did not change one single thing I was going to do. Because a reason is not a permission. Adrian had a reason, a real one, a sad one, and I felt it. I felt it in my chest standing in that cold doorway. And it did not for 1 second buy her the right to put a cracked plate in front of me and blame my granddaughter's lungs, or to look away while her husband spent that child's medicine on a countertop. Being hurt once does not license you to hurt down the line forever. That is the oldest lie there is, and I had believed a smaller version of it my whole life. The version that says if you just absorb enough of other people's pain quietly, it stops somewhere. It doesn't stop. It just finds the next quiet person. I had been the next quiet person for 15 years, and I was done, and her dead mother, God rest her, did not change that. I'm sorry about your mother, I said, and I meant it, and she could hear that I meant it, which somehow made it worse for her. I am. That's a wound no child should carry. But, Adrian, you took a thing that was done to you, and you did it to me, and you used a child to do it, and understanding why doesn't make me stand here and take it. It just means I'll pity you while I don't. She stared at me. The fury and the grief were fighting it out across her face, and neither one was winning. And then she held out the casserole dish one last time, like a reflex, like her hands didn't know what else to do. I brought you, she started. Take it home, Adrian, I said. Take it home, or put it in the corner. You know where the corner is. She left it on my porch railing. She turned and walked back to the car where my son was not brave enough to be, and she got in, and they drove away, and I stood there a moment longer in the cold with a stranger's casserole cooling on my railing. And then I picked it up and carried it next door to Winnie, who was thrilled and asked me what it was, and I told her the honest truth. I said, I have no idea, but it isn't mine to eat. The next weeks moved fast, the way things do once you finally stop dragging your feet. The house sold in 9 days. I told Patrice, the realtor, that I did not want a sign in the yard, and I did not want the highest offer. She looked at me like I'd asked her to sell it backward. But a higher number came in the second morning, an investor who wanted to flip it, and I turned it down flat and took the offer from the young couple instead, the ones expecting their second baby, because Patrice said the wife had cried in my kitchen, standing on the yellow linoleum, saying it looked just like her grandmother's. I did not want my house flipped. I wanted it lived in. There is a difference, and it is the same difference as the one between a family and people who happen to share a last name. I found my new place on the west side, a little complex for folks over 55, 1 bedroom, ground, a window that looked out on a maple tree and a patio just big enough for 2 chairs, though I only needed the one. The manager was a woman named Ramona Estes, who wore her reading glasses pushed up on her head and forgot they were there, and she called me Miss Coralie inside of 10 minutes and meant it warm. She asked if I wanted to think it over. I told her I was 71 years old, and I had done enough thinking for 3 lifetimes, and I would take it. She laughed, the real kind, the kind that folds up the eyes, and I knew we were going all right, her and me. Ren called on a Wednesday. I had wondered if she would. She had found my number in her father's phone, she said, and she'd been too scared to call, and her voice on the line sounded younger than 13, folded up small the way a kid gets when the adults have made the house into a place you have to be quiet in. Grandma, she said, is it true you're selling the house? It's true, sweetheart, I said, and then a silence, and then the thing she'd really called to say, coming out in a rush. Grandma, that night, the plate, she said something about you, and I just sat there. I didn't say anything. I went upstairs. I should have said something, and I didn't, and I'm sorry. And I had to close my eyes for a second because there it was, the word. Sorry. Out of the mouth of the one person at that table who had done absolutely nothing wrong. 15 years, 3 adults, and the only apology I ever got came from a 13-year-old for a crime she did not commit. Ren, I said, listen to me. Are you listening? It was not your job to fix that. You are 13. It is not a child's job to stand up in a kitchen full of grown people and defend her grandmother. That was the grown people's job, and every single one of them failed it. and not one of those failures is yours. You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing. She was crying, the careful, quiet kind, the kind you do so the person in the next room doesn't hear. But you're leaving, she said. I'm not leaving you, I said. I'm leaving a situation. Those are not the same thing, and I need you to hold on to that difference. Because people are going to try to tell you the other version. You can call me anytime, day or night, I don't care what time. And when you're old enough to drive, or when somebody can bring you, you come see me and my door opens for you, always. But I am not coming back to that house, sweetheart. Not for holidays, not for birthdays. That part is over. But you and me are not over. You and me are just getting started, on new ground, on my ground, where nobody puts anybody at the corner. Okay, she whispered. And then so quiet I almost missed it. Is there really money for my medicine that mom and dad can't touch? And I understood in that one small question exactly how much a 13-year-old had already figured out about the adults around her. There is, I said. It's in a trust. It's yours. Nobody can touch it, but the people whose only job is to keep you well. Not your mom, not your dad, not even me. It's the safest thing I have ever built, and I built it for you. Grandma, she said, I don't want it to be about money. I know you don't, baby, I said. That's exactly why you're the one who gets it. Garrett found me 2 weeks into the new place. I still don't know how. Maybe he just drove the complexes on the west side one by one until he saw my car. Either way, on a Tuesday evening, the little intercom in my kitchen buzzed, and Ramona's voice came through, careful, protective already. She'd learned me fast. Miss Coralie, she said, there's a man down here, says he's your son. And I held the button down and I thought about how many times in 15 years I'd wanted to say the words, tell him I'm not available, and had always been available, always, the way a light switch is available, the way a floor is. Tell him, I said, I'll come down to the lobby. I'm not opening my apartment. I put on my cardigan. I walked down the short hall. Through the lobby glass, I could see him standing on the other side, hands jammed in his pockets, staring at the floor like a boy outside the principal's office, and for a second, just a second, he was 6 years old and had broken something and knew it. Then he was 44 again, and I opened the inner door just enough to stand in the frame, the way I do now, and I said, Garrett. He looked up. His eyes were red. He hadn't shaved. Mom, he said. You weren't going to tell me where you moved. No, I said, I wasn't. He took that. I just want to talk, he said. Then talk, I said, I'm listening. And he opened his mouth and closed it and opened it. And then he said the first true thing I'd heard from him in 2 years. Adrian doesn't know I'm here. And then, Mom, I know. I know what I did, the money. I heard her that night with the plate and I turned up the TV. And I moved the money and I told you it was handled and I knew you wouldn't check. I've been sitting with that. I can't sleep. That sounds uncomfortable, I said. He winced. That's fair, he said. Garrett, I said, what do you want from me right now, tonight? What is it you drove around the whole west side to get? I don't know, he said, and I believed him. Is there a way back? Anyway, I'll do anything. And I looked at my son for a long time. The boy who climbed into our bed during thunderstorms, the man who stood 3 rooms from his mother and turned up the volume. The father who looked at his daughter's medicine and thought, she never checks. And I did not hate him. That surprised me, standing there. I had room in me for a lot of things, but hate wasn't one of them, not for him. He was still the person I nursed through croup and chicken pox and a broken heart at 17. But I have learned the hard difference between loving someone and rescuing them, and I was done confusing the two. There might be a way back, I said. But it isn't one you walk in a week, and it isn't one I'm going to walk with you. You have to do it alone. You have to figure out who you married and why you stopped defending the people you love a long time before that plate ever hit the table. And you have to do all of that without me in the room telling you it's okay, because it isn't okay, and I have spent your whole life making things okay for you. And that, Garrett, that turns out to be part of how we got here. He was crying now, the quiet adult kind, a man trying to breathe evenly and losing. If you do the work, I said, the real work, not the performance of it, not counseling you can wave at me like a hall pass. If you actually become someone different, then maybe in a year or 2 or 5, you and I sit down and have a cup of coffee. Maybe. But I'm not going to wait by the door for it, son. I did that for 15 years. I'm going to go live my life in the meantime. Do you understand me? Yes, he said. Go home, Garrett. He turned to go. At the door, he stopped, and without looking back, he said the thing she said in the kitchen. I heard it. I want you to know I heard it. I know you did, I said. That's the whole problem, sweetheart. You heard it, and you turned up the TV. His letter came about 3 weeks later. No return address, but I knew the hand. He said he was in counseling and hadn't told Adrian. He said he'd spent his whole life turning up the volume so he wouldn't have to decide what kind of man he was, and that he'd finally run out of volume. He said he didn't expect anything. He just wanted me to know I was right. I read it twice, and then I did not throw it away, and I did not frame it. I put it in the drawer beside the telephone, the important drawer, and I closed it. Some apologies need to sit in a drawer a long time before they can become anything else. That is not cruelty. That is just honesty with somewhere to keep it. I gave the bulk of the house money to the trust, the way I planned. And there was some left over that I hadn't earmarked, and I gave it to the meal program at the Methodist church, the one I used to drive for before my knees quit, the one that brings hot food to old widows who can't get out. They were the people, it turned out, who had never once put me at a corner table. Full circle, and I didn't even plan it that way. Wren came to the new place for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in December. Her mother dropped her at the curb and did not come in, which was in fact the correct arrangement, and I noted that Adrian had at least learned that much. Wren brought me a picture frame she'd painted herself, pale blue with little gold stars around the edge, and she'd already put a photo in it, one I'd never seen, me holding her when she was maybe 4, both of us laughing at something off camera. I found it in Dad's closet, she said. He has a whole box of pictures of you. I put it on the shelf above my chair. Right there, I said. That's the spot. We made hot chocolate, and before she left, she did the thing I will carry with me the rest of my days. She went into my little kitchen, and she opened the cabinet where I keep my dishes, and she stood there a moment looking at them, and then she said, careful, trying to make it sound light and not quite managing, Grandma, is there anything in here I'm not supposed to use? And I came and stood beside my granddaughter, and I looked at the one nice set of china I own, the good plates, and I took them down and I put them in her hands. Wren, I said, everything in this kitchen is yours. Every plate, every cup, every shelf, every crumb. There is no separate anything in this house. Do you understand me? In here you eat off the good ones. In here you always did. Her eyes filled up. Okay, Grandma, she said. And after she'd gone home, I went to the drawer, the low one where, out of some old habit I hadn't examined, I had unpacked and put away the cracked blue plastic plate, my plate, brought from the old house without even thinking, because that is how deep a thing like that gets into you. You carry the corner with you to the new place and set it up again without noticing. I took it out. I held it a minute, that faded chip, that hairline scar, and I walked it out to the trash and I let it go. Then I sat on my little patio in Everett's sweater with a blanket over my knees, and the cold came in, and somewhere in the complex, somebody was playing the old crisp music, the kind with real instruments. And I thought about a woman standing in a mudroom a few months back with a casserole in her hands, believing that silence was the rent she had to pay to be allowed inside. And I did not miss her, but I was gentle with her. She got us here. I was a nurse for 40 years. I spent my whole life taking care of everybody, and here is the one thing I learned too late. Staying quiet so you get to keep your seat at the table is not love. It is just disappearing slowly and calling it kindness. A plate is only a plate until the day it tells you exactly where you stand in someone's heart. I never took away the thing that keeps my grandchild alive. I only stopped letting the people who look down on me be the ones holding it. And closing a door is not a cruelty. Sometimes it is the only way to make sure that on the other side of it, a child is safe and a tired old woman finally gets to sit down at a table that was always, always hers.